And so Netanyahu is in complete control in Washington right now. And he has that control until the midterms. So Netanyahu's using Trump to buy time for a sequenced demolition of all his regional enemies, but it first starts in Gaza.
So recently, Max Blumenthal went on Judge Napolitano's show to expose Netanyahu's control over the U.S. government, or at the very least, the U.S. foreign policy apparatus. He gets into what this means for the Trump administration at a time where many Americans are turning against Israel, and what this has to do with U.S. foreign policy going forward. So let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Max, why do you think Trump is personally indifferent, or at least publicly indifferent, to the slaughter and starvation in Gaza, and now to this latest tragedy, the intentional murder of journalists in a hospital?
I think the issue is, why is Trump hostile to the concept of any form of diplomacy at all? And why is he allowing Israel to shape his entire agenda on the ground? And it's obvious, we've been talking about it for maybe years now on this show. It's he is a vehicle for Israeli influence. And you can see that in the form of Mike Huckabee, his ambassador. You can see that in the form of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is basically an Israeli replacement for the United Nations, which is fueling the starvation and genocide. And the U.S. has created a front organization to allow the Israelis to avoid responsibility legally under the Geneva Conventions for the population in Gaza that they're starving. So, but beyond that, right now and throughout the past hours, there have been massive protests across Israel. The main highways are shut down all across central Israel. People are out protesting for a ceasefire, not necessarily because they care about the lives of Palestinians, but because there are 50 dead and living captives there who are Jewish Israelis, and they want them out. And Netanyahu has completely ignored not only those protesters, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, maybe not the majority of Israelis, but a large plurality. And he's ignored the warnings of his chief of staff of the Israeli military, Eyal Zamir.
Yeah, Zamir is actually the head of the IDF, who says that if Netanyahu occupies Gaza, this will be a black hole for Israel. So this is exactly right. If Trump's allegiance to Israel was ever in doubt, just look back to his first term. He's always been that way. He's always been influenced by the Israel lobby, the Adelsons, who gave him hundreds of millions of dollars. He moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. He signed the Abraham Accords. He ripped up the JCPOA. He's bankrolling their genocide in Gaza. He even discarded U.S. foreign policy aims that he had stated to come to an agreement with Iran to produce a new JCPOA-like agreement, bring in a new inspections regime to curtail their nuclear weapons program. He shelved that for the sake of a potential regime change war with Iran, which I don't think we've heard the end of. But that shows that this administration is America last. It's Israel first.
He was warned that the hostages or the captives will all be killed, and that many of his own men will be killed, and that the reservists do not necessarily, they have a manpower problem, and that they should accept a ceasefire. He has ignored the delegation of Hamas that appeared in Doha and accepted once again another ceasefire, which led even the Israeli Army Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir to declare they have shown remarkable flexibility, and it shows that our operations on the ground destroying Gaza are working. Netanyahu can't accept it, and Hamas has correctly said again this week he can't accept it because it will lead to the collapse of his coalition. So basically, Donald Trump is Netanyahu's lifeline. Donald Trump doesn't exist as an independent entity. And he's also, while he may not be diagnosed with dementia, he has about the same mental functioning capacity as Joe Biden at this point.
Well, that's stepping out there on a limb a little bit, but I agree with Max otherwise. And, Max is Jewish. They're going to call him anti Semitic again for saying these kind of things, which are true. The IDF chief has told and revealed the fact that this was never about the hostages. Hamas was handing over hostages in each phase of the ceasefire that was once in place, that Donald Trump orchestrated, by the way, and Netanyahu violated that ceasefire. Now Hamas is in possession of something like 50 hostages, and Israel, meanwhile, has something like 3,500 with secret evidence against them. None of them are charged, but this is massively disproportionate in the first place, and Hamas was willing to give over the hostages. Now, even former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert said he can't defend Israel against charges of genocide anymore in a recent interview in Haaretz that happened back in May. Ehud Barak has blasted this policy in Gaza. Yair Golan has called it cruel and insufferable, this policy. So even some dissidents within Israel are trying to warn against this, object to it, reject this policy of occupying Gaza. Netanyahu's probably not going to listen. He still has like 75% of the popular support, but all those things are true.
I mean, there's nothing going on upstairs. So Donald Trump is basically being led around by Netanyahu. It's his job to keep his coalition going. And that means no diplomacy, total destruction, starvation, genocide, collapse of the rules-based order. U.S. soft power is gone forever. And it's because Trump is a vehicle for Israeli and specifically Netanyahu's influence.
Yeah, rules-based international order. It's never rules-based when you have the U.S. bankrolling a genocide, bankrolling Israel first, bankrolling and tangling alliances in the Middle East, doing whatever you want. Doing stuff like waging wars with a secret nuclear weapon power against a country that is supposedly cultivating a secret nuclear weapons program. That's what we just found out. But Max is right. This is the moneyed and lobbied interests of the Israel lobby, AIPAC, which doesn't have to register as a foreign lobby, much like every other country's lobby. They get a special carve-out there, and Trump is a product of that. He's not unique in that way. AIPAC has had leverage over previous presidents, but probably the most leverage ever over Trump, the most pro-Israel president ever, and he'll tell you that. He's boasted about that routinely.
Have any IDF soldiers been taken as hostages or prisoners of war, whatever you want to call them, by Hamas?
Well, on October 7th.
No, not on October 7th, but since October 7th.
No, they've generally been killed or they have been taken by Israeli rescue teams. There were attempts during the last Israeli operation in Gaza, Gideon's Chariot, to actually take a few Israeli soldiers who were wounded. They actually captured some of their weapons, but the soldiers wound up being killed because it was difficult to transport their bodies when you have, drones in the air. But this spoke to the failure of Israel's last operation, Gideon's Chariot, which has led us to the current juncture and crisis where Israel's embarking on a kind of final solution to destroy Gaza City, destroy the densely populated urban areas. Gideon's Chariot was primarily conducted in previously destroyed areas, which is why you also saw like contractors who were destroying homes to flatten out the area also being killed by resistance factions. So I think there's a much higher chance that soldiers could actually be taken captive in the next phase if Israel chooses to go in. Right now, what they're doing is like softening up, which means just randomly bombing civilian areas, destroying entire neighborhoods in Gaza City, primarily to the east of Gaza, like Al-Tufa, and then planning to go in.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happened. But even like a week or two ago, Netanyahu has said the decision is made. They are going in. They're occupying Gaza. It's part of the greater Israel project. It's part of that big map that Netanyahu's held up to show future Israel, where the borders he wants there to be for Israel, including expanding the West Bank settlements into Lebanon and Syria. There's even parts of Sinai and Iraq covered in that. So they want to expand. They want to do it on the bankroll of the U.S. And, the urban areas have been completely bombed. Places like Gaza City, which Anthony Aguilar, the whistleblower from the GHF, he called that the apocalypse zone. And Rafah, that's where they want to build a concentration zone. It's a concentration camp. They want to relocate people to there. Ehud Olmert has blasted that as a concentration camp. Again, this is a former prime minister of Israel. And Max is right. Some of the IDF soldiers that were taken on October 7th, actually later, once released, were whistleblowers. They said we were issued what was called the Hannibal Directive to kill hundreds of Israelis rather than to allow them to get into the arms of Hamas, which may have killed several hundred people on October 7th. Not the full amount. There's about 1,200 deaths at that time, but they said we had issues from Israel to kill people before they could be captive.
What will be a bloodbath like we haven't even seen before.
Is there no pressure on Trump to engage in diplomacy, to feed the starving, to recognize the war crimes, to restrain Netanyahu?
No, I mean, the reason that Netanyahu is moving with so much urgency right now, one of the main reasons, I mean, there are reasons that relate to regional shifts and regional military realities. But I think the main reason is that he has carte blanche, a complete green light from Trump until the midterms. And I think, the Democrats, while widely hated and absolutely pathetic, are expected to win the House. And that could change the political calculus in Washington somewhat, given the polling numbers and the pressure on the Democrats to actually take action on this genocide. A new University of Maryland poll shows that only 11% of Democrats under the age of 35 side with Israel over the Palestinians, and
Right.
a wide majority of Democrats side with the Palestinians over the Israelis.
Yeah, I mostly agree with Max. I certainly do that Netanyahu's mentality is now or never, but I don't necessarily think it pertains only to the midterms. Maybe that could change things to a degree, but it doesn't mean that AIPAC's influence will wane. AIPAC will still, primary politicians that go against the pro-Israel, Israel first line. But this is now and never, I think, for Netanyahu, because he sees the overall demographic shift in the United States, where you have young people, even conservative young people, that are no longer on board with this zealous pro-Israel attitude, the Israel first mind frame that captivates Washington, D.C. And he thinks that, he has to act now to consummate and fulfill the Greater Israel Project, including the occupation of Gaza, in the next few years. Because in 10 years, the dynamics will have shifted. AIPAC's influence may wane by that point.
11% side with the Israelis over the Palestinians. So
right. That's an enormous gap. I'm surprised there's not more conversation about that in mainstream press, and not more action by Democratic leaders. I guess most of the leaders are over 35, but they're crazy to ignore that if they want to stay as a viable political party.
Well, the problem is, number one, they're in the minority. They can't do hearings, or really they have no power. And number two, I mean, look at their leadership. It's Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, who are both vehicles for Israeli influence. I mean, Chuck Schumer is kind of like driving the Israeli death train. He really believes in this project. His last book is about the plague of anti-Semitism while a genocide is going on.
Yeah, that's your priority when you're bankrolling a genocide, for sure. And I wonder what causes a lot of that anti-Semitism. Maybe it's just doubling down on this genocide. So yeah, Schumer is a horrible pro-Israel nut. So is Hakeem Jeffries. Both are applauded by AIPAC, of course, naturally so.
So, and they're hated. Their approval ratings are in the toilet. But the issue right now is that Trump is in complete control of the Republican Party. He got the Republican Congress to leave early for an early recess to avoid voting on a release of the Epstein files. So that tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah, thanks to Mike Johnson, too. And with Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna trying to fight against that, that's what you had. And guess what? They don't take flack for it. They're not the traitors. The traitor is Massey for actually wanting to fulfill Trump's promises to unveil the Epstein files. Absurd.
And so Netanyahu is in complete control in Washington right now. And he has that control until the midterms. And the other factors are he wants to sequence out what his military is able to do. The reservist corps is depleted after the campaign in southern Lebanon and in Gaza, and then a war with Iran, another more violent conflict with Iran, is immediately on the horizon. We're seeing members of the general staff of the Israeli military go on Israeli media and predict that actually call for what they call preemptive strikes, because they believe Iran is repairing its air defenses and is developing its military. Iran just carried out naval exercises in preparation for a conflict.
You knew it was coming. You knew they would talk about bombing Iran again, regime change in Iran. This hasn't gotten mainstream coverage, but Max is right. Israeli officials have talked about this recently. Regime change is their ultimate goal. It's their end game there. They've always wanted it from the clean break strategy. We know that from the memo that Wesley Clark saw in 2001. It's coincidentally the only of those 7 countries on that memo that has not been overthrown in some way so far. So we knew this was coming. What's the over-under on Netanyahu? You know, how many days will it take for him to say, Iran is weeks away from acquiring a nuclear weapon? It's going to happen soon.
He can't do the final solution in Gaza and a conflict with Iran at the same time. And they're also using the Trump administration, which it's effectively the Israeli Trump administration right now in Lebanon, to try to push the Lebanese government, a very weak government with a pathetic military, to disarm Hezbollah. And they're saying that they want to get it done by the end of the month, by August 31st. Tom Barak and Morgan Ortagus, who is a Israeli zealot, former Lebanese Christian who is converted to Judaism, and Tom Barak are in Beirut to push for this disarmament, which could amount to Lebanese civil war. But the point is to get a powerful resistance faction off Israel's back so it can go and carry out the final onslaught against Iran, which I think is an absolute fantasy. So Netanyahu is using Trump to buy time for a sequenced demolition of all his regional enemies, but it first starts in Gaza.
Sure does. And the steps they're taking to try to destabilize Iran through Lebanon, by the way, that Max correctly says risks civil war in Lebanon, that's good for the Greater Israel Project, too. It has a dual purpose, because if they make inroads against the Iranian regime, great. But if it causes a civil war in Lebanon, also great, because they have aspirations for the Greater Israel Project to take over huge swaths of Lebanon. This isn't a secret. This is widely publicized. In the same way they wanted civil war in Syria to destabilize that regime and take large parts of Syria. That's why they wanted Assad deposed. They said, so much money flows through Syria to go to Hezbollah, but the real aim is Greater Israel, taking more territory, and that's where we're at. So yeah, Max is totally right here. Trump has carte blanche support for Netanyahu. Netanyahu steers U.S. foreign policy in the region, I hate to say. And guess what? A lot of the neocons and the Zionists in our Congress are totally complicit. So it's not just Netanyahu. And if Netanyahu completely controlled everything, there would have been a regime change operation in Iran with U.S. soldiers and boots on the ground there to consummate that. So it's a little bit more of a complicated dynamic, but the considerable influence that Netanyahu does have over our politicians are palpable. Is it 100%? No, but it seems like it's darn close. And if Iranians would have shot down American troops, regime change was going to be on the table with Iran. So yeah, this is devastating. Even though there are some key opponents and dissidents within Israel, it looks like Netanyahu's going to move in, occupy Gaza, cleanse the rest of the Palestinians that remain and, dare to object to this. It's so absurd and just murderous and vile and just criminal behavior, but that is the truth. I think that there's nothing that's going to stop that from the Trump administration, despite some pushback from, the dissident class in Congress, to the extent that that even exists. It's few and far between. There's only a few Republicans. There's quite a few Democrats, but Republicans own both houses, and AIPAC, as always, owns both houses too. But what do you guys think? Let me know down below. Do you think that this is going to go through, that Netanyahu will invade Gaza? How many more people will die over this? Where do you see this going, and do you think the midterms in the United States will affect the future of either Gaza or Israel? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Judge Napolitano. Really appreciate his program. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support the channel, and in return, I'll give you access to all of my members-only videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.